The rumble outside my window wasn't just loud, it was wrong. That kind of sound didn't belong on Maple Lane. Not on a Monday morning. I opened the front door with my coffee still in hand, still wearing the housecoat I'd mended last winter. And there they were. Jaron stepped down from the driver's side of the rental truck like he was coming home for Thanksgiving. Bree followed, sunglasses perched like she'd just stepped off a runway. I didn't even get a hello. "You don't need this anymore," Jaron said, nodding toward the house as he waved a clipboard in the air. Before I could form a full sentence, a team of men in matching shirts filed out of the truck and into my living room. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd missed a conversation. Maybe I'd forgotten something, an agreement, a call and note. But I hadn't. The refrigerator was the first to go. Then the oven. My washer and dryer unhooked, like I was moving out. I stood by the stairs, one hand still holding the mug, the other gripping the banister tighter than I realized. No one looked at me. No one asked. My legs felt wooden as I walked into the dining room and watched them remove the hutch Wesley built in '87. Bree pointed at the painting over the fireplace, my mother's favorite, and said, "That'll look great in the guest room." One of the movers nodded and took it down. They moved through my house like it belonged to them, like I was just some tenant whose lease had ended. I wanted to scream, but my voice stayed buried beneath 50 years of keeping the peace. So I stood there, invisible in my own home, while my son carried away the clock his father made with his own hands. And that's when I realized it wasn't just furniture they were taking. It was the story of my life, piece by piece. I've never needed much. Just enough thread in the drawer, flour in the jar, and a front porch where I could watch the hydrangeas come back every spring. When Wesley died, Jaron was only 11. The steel beam fell without warning, the kind of accident that doesn't leave time for goodbyes. One moment I was packing his lunch, and the next I was signing papers with shaking hands, trying to understand how a man so steady could be gone so suddenly. I didn't cry in front of Jaron. I stitched, baked, ironed, and held the world together with safety pins and prayer. He used to call every Sunday evening, just to check in. "Hey, Ma, need anything?" His voice would rattle the quiet in the best way. He even came by to fix the fence once, though I had already braced it with an old rake handle and rope. He laughed when he saw it, called it a classic Calvina move. And then came Bree. It wasn't sudden. The calls came later, then skipped a week, then 2. When he did answer, his voice was shorter, tighter. Bree was always in the background talking to someone else, laughing into another phone. I started writing letters I never sent, updates about the garden, a new lemon loaf I baked for the neighbor, a squirrel that figured out how to open the bird feeder. I would tuck them into a drawer, hoping maybe someday he'd care again about the little things. Della noticed. She always did. She started visiting more often, bringing peach jam and books she thought I'd like. We'd sit out on the porch trading recipes and complaints about the HOA. She once said, "Calvina, if you ever disappear, they'd have to rename this whole block." I smiled, but I knew I was already fading from some people's maps. And now, standing in my own house with empty walls and stripped counters, I knew something else. They didn't just take what I had, they'd been erasing me for years. Bree barely broke a sweat as she directed the men, one hand on her hip and the other scrolling through her phone. She pointed at things with a casual air, like she was choosing items from a catalog, not stripping someone's home. My home. The boxes were already labeled: kitchen essentials, master decor, guest suite. She'd planned this. Not just today, but for weeks, maybe months. And Jaron. He stood by the truck's ramp, nodding quietly, like this was a chore they had both agreed upon. I didn't say a word when she wrapped up the china set that belonged to my grandmother. I didn't move when they carried out the cedar chest from the hallway, the one filled with old photo albums and handwritten letters. I had meant to go through them again someday, "We'll take care of it," Bree said, offering a smile so polite it felt sharp. "You won't have to lift a finger." I nodded, because I didn't trust my mouth to form anything softer than a scream. That night, long after the truck's engine faded, I sat alone in the quiet. The walls looked too bare. The air felt hollow. Even the ticking was gone. Wesley's clock gone with it. Out of some habit, I opened my laptop, checking for emails. And there it was, her post. A filtered photo. A caption curled in cursive font. "Furnishing our dream home with love and intention. New chapter Diarche blessed." I zoomed in. The guest bed was dressed with the quilt my mother had stitched in 1962. Every square, a different piece of family fabric. My baby clothes, my father's Sunday shirts, a sliver of my wedding veil. That quilt had never left this house. Until today. No one asked, not once. They were calling it theirs now. Their taste, their dream, their warmth. But it was my memory, my history, my stitches. I closed the laptop, not in anger, just in recognition. When Jaron was 6, he told me he wanted to play the saxophone. Not the recorder, not a hand-me-down flute, the saxophone like the man in the jazz video we watched together on the tiny TV in the kitchen. I nodded and said we'd see, but I already knew I'd make it happen. That year, I picked up a third job. I cleaned houses on Saturday mornings, right after my Friday night shift's hemming pants at the dry cleaner. My fingers cracked and bled from the fabric starch, but I kept going. Every hour added up. Every coin mattered. I sold the earrings Wesley gave me on our wedding day. They weren't extravagant, just small gold loops with delicate engraving. He'd picked them out himself. I kept them in a velvet pouch for nearly 2 decades, but a saxophone costs more than sentiment. Jaron played in every school concert. I cheered from folding chairs in overwaxed gyms, wearing pressed blouses and lipstick, even when I hadn't slept. He never knew what I gave up. I never wanted him to. I didn't remarry. I told myself it was because I had Jaron, and he needed all of me. But maybe I also believed no one could love me the way Wesley did, steady and kind, always listening. Della once said, "Be careful. You're raising someone who might forget you're not infinite." I laughed and waved her off. Back then I thought giving everything would protect me from being forgotten. I thought love, real love, was about sacrifice. But now, with the quilt gone and the silence louder than the clock used to tick, I see it differently. Maybe it wasn't just that they forgot. Maybe I helped them forget by never asking for anything in return. I picked up the phone and dialed Della. She answered on the first ring like she'd been waiting. "I need your help," I said. "I'll be there in 10, she replied. And for the first time in weeks, I let the tears fall. Della didn't even knock. She stepped inside, a gust of cool air following her, and stopped mid-stride when she saw me at the kitchen table. My hands were clasped so tightly around a cold mug of coffee, the knuckles were white. "That wasn't help," she said quietly. Setting her bag down, "That was a heist." I tried to speak, but my throat wouldn't cooperate. She came closer, put her palm on my shoulder, and squeezed once. "You've got to stop thinking this is normal. It's not normal. You're not some charity warehouse for their new life." "I don't want to make trouble," I murmured. "They're my family." Della crouched so her eyes met mine. "Family or not, you still have rights. You still have proof. The deed. The title. The footage. Please, Calvina, check it before they do more." Her words echoed through the kitchen long after she left. I moved slowly, like someone waking from a dream. For years, I'd kept Wesley's papers in the back drawer, under old sewing patterns and tax returns, never imagining I'd need them. He'd called it our safety net, smiling at me the way he always did when he wanted me to take something seriously. I went to the hallway and slid the drawer open. My fingers trembled as they brushed past the yellowing envelopes until they found the thick gray folder labeled in Wesley's careful handwriting, W. Merle Trust. I lifted it out like it might break. Back at the table, I laid it open and saw everything: deed, trust agreement, insurance papers, all the things I'd ignored for years because I wanted to believe my son's love was stronger than signatures. The pages smelled faintly of ink and dust, and Wesley's signature looked steadier than my heartbeat felt. For a moment, I let my hand rest on his name as if he could feel me across time. I turned the last page and saw the clause he'd added, the one he'd told me about once, and I'd forgotten. And just like that, something inside me shifted. The camera app hadn't been opened in months. It only took a few minutes to find the footage. I watched from the kitchen table, phone in hand, eyes locked on the screen. There was Bree stepping out of the truck, clipboard already in hand. She wasn't helping, she was managing. She pointed at the oven like it was a showroom piece, nodded as the movers carried it off. No hesitation. No permission. Then came the moment I didn't expect. Jaron standing by the entryway, pulling out a folded sheet of paper. He handed it to one of the movers with a quick nod. The man scanned it and tucked it in his pocket. The camera caught just enough, my name typed at the bottom. Not written. A forged note. They knew what they were doing. They came with a script and hoped I wouldn't look closely enough to tear it apart. I paused the video and took a long breath. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just saved the file to my desktop and backed it up to 2 different drives. I labeled it House Footage, June. Nothing dramatic, just a record, a truth. Then I picked up the phone. Della answered on the first ring. "I was waiting for this," she said. "I think it's time I stop pretending I'm fragile." "Good," she replied, "because you're not." By lunch, we were sitting in the office of a lawyer. Della trusted a calm man named Nathan with steady eyes and a voice that didn't flinch when I told him my son forged my name. He didn't ask if I was sure. He didn't doubt me. He looked over the trust documents, nodded at the clause Wesley had insisted on including, and then leaned back in his chair. "We'll handle this quietly," he said, "but they're not walking away with this." And for the first time since the truck pulled up, I believed that maybe neither was I. Nathan flipped through the papers slowly, his eyes scanning each page like a surgeon tracing the edge of a scalpel. I watched him. Hands folded in my lap, the folder between us like a thin shield. "The house," I said, "is still in my name. They never asked for a transfer, never signed anything. They just assumed." Nathan nodded. "And this clause," Wesley added. He tapped the page gently. "It's ironclad. Anything removed from the property without your signed consent is considered an unlawful transfer of assets." Della let out a low whistle and leaned back in her chair. "They took your stove," she said, "and gave you a legal win." I wanted to smile, but it didn't quite reach. It wasn't just about the stove. It was the photo albums, the quilt, the clock, the parts of me they carried off like junk while I stood still, too stunned to stop them. Nathan outlined our next steps, filing a notice of property recovery, issuing a cease and desist, preparing for mediation if they fought back. I listened carefully, nodding when I needed to, asking questions where I could. Every move now had weight. Not just emotional weight, but legal structure, protection, boundaries. Before we left, I signed the forms. My signature felt deliberate. Solid, like a line drawn in ink and intention. Della drove us home humming under her breath. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Back at the house, I walked through each room slowly. Some were still half empty. Others looked untouched. But all of them somehow already felt different. This wasn't the end of something. This was the beginning of claiming what was always mine, not just the property, but the voice I had swallowed for too long. The driveway to their new house curved like a stage entrance, clean landscaped, and wide enough for the rental truck to roll in without scraping the hedges. Bree had picked it for the curb appeal. She always liked things that looked polished from the outside. But as the truck pulled up, it didn't make it past the gate. A patrol car sat parked just ahead. An officer stepped out, calm and unreadable, one hand resting near his belt. He raised a palm toward the driver. The truck eased to a stop. "Afternoon," the officer said, walking around to the side window. "We received a report of property transported without proper authorization. Items in this vehicle are registered under another name." Bree's voice snapped before Jaren could even respond. "This is a mistake. She gave them to us." The officer looked at the clipboard in her hands, then at the paper she held out, likely the same forged note from the footage. "He didn't take it. He didn't have to. Because just then I stepped out of the car, parked across the street. Quiet, calm, wearing the same jacket I'd worn the day they emptied my kitchen." "No," I said evenly, walking toward them. "I didn't give them anything." Bree turned pale. Jaren looked like a boy again, caught with his hand in the jar and no story rehearsed. I handed the officer a folder with the trust clause, the footage timestamps, and the ownership documents. Nathan had prepared it all in sequence. The officer nodded, then turned back to the truck driver. "You'll need to keep the items in the vehicle. They're being held for return to the registered owner." The driver sighed. He'd seen this before. People fighting over things they didn't earn. Bree's hands shook as she reached for her phone. Jaren didn't speak. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to shout. I just stood there as still and grounded as the house they tried to strip from memory. By the time they turned the truck around, I was already back in my seat, windows up, ready to follow it home. They carried the items back in reverse order. The refrigerator was first scraped along the doorway, just like it had been before. The clock came next, its glass face intact, though I suspected it would never tick the same way again. The movers were efficient, quiet. I didn't blame them. They weren't the thieves, just the hands hired to carry other people's decisions. As each piece returned to its corner, I realized something strange. The house didn't feel full again. Not quite. But it also didn't feel empty. It felt real, honest. Like the breath after a long-held silence. Some items I let go. The hutch went to a local women's shelter. The embroidered pillows to the church thrift sale. Not out of anger, just clarity. I no longer needed everything to come back just to feel whole. Della came by the next morning with paint samples tucked under her arm and fresh cinnamon muffins in her bag. We chose a soft green for the kitchen, something lighter than before. The sun hit it differently in the mornings, and I found myself standing there longer, letting it warm the floor beneath my feet. We played music while we painted. Old Motown. Nothing heavy. And for the first time in weeks, I laughed, really laughed, when Della smeared paint across my sleeve and blamed it on the brush acting possessed. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. A message from Jaren. "Can we talk?" Just 3 words. No apology. No explanation. Just a line tossed into the air like bait, hoping I'd bite. I stared at it for a while, let the screen dim, then set the phone face down and returned to the trim work. I didn't need more words. I needed peace, and I was starting to remember how to build that for myself. Tomorrow, I'd buy a new lamp for the reading corner, something with soft light and no history. The mornings are quiet again. Not silent, just calm. The kind of calm that comes after a storm that didn't break you. I sit on the porch with my coffee steam rising in the cold air, the cup warm against my fingers. The hydrangeas are fading into fall colors the way they do every year, soft and familiar. There's still a little rust on the railing where the movers brushed past, but I haven't painted it yet. Some reminders don't bother me. They haven't been back. No calls, no visits. Jaren hasn't followed up on his message. Bree never reached out. Maybe they're waiting for me to cool off. Maybe they've realized I won't. Either way, I'm not holding space anymore for apologies that won't come. Forgiveness doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes it looks like closing the door and not reopening it. The footage still saved. Copied twice. One copy sits with Nathan neatly labeled. The other is on a drive in the bottom drawer of my sewing table. Not because I want to use it, but because I won't be caught off guard again. The lawyer's number is pinned on the bulletin board next to the grocery list and a postcard from Della's trip to Maine. Practical things. Things that remind me of who I am when no one's trying to rewrite it. The deed is back where it belongs, locked in the safe behind Wesley's bookshelf. I dusted that shelf last week. Took my time. Ran my fingers across the spines of his old manuals and gardening guides. The combination clicked easily, like muscle memory. I didn't hesitate. I don't need to explain anything anymore. Not to Jaren. Not to Bree. Not even to myself. They thought I was soft because I didn't shout. Because I let them walk through my door without slamming it behind them. But I knew where the cameras were. I always did.